Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Hares Hill Book Club on the Anxious Generation. I am Kyle Worrell. I'm principal of Hares Hill Elementary School, and with me, as usual, I have Dr. Ryan Palmer joining us for our podcast update of our book club from, Ryan, when was that? That was there was a lot of snow on the ground. I believe it was late January. Yeah, it was late January. Very cold. But we had a great session, a little smaller session because I think the weather didn't help bring folks out as much. But we had a great session talking about the anxious generation and how to navigate this world with technology with our kids. So it was a great conversation, and welcome, Ryan. And again, happy to have you. This has been a great partnership that we're looking to continue into the spring. Just before we get started, our next book club meeting is going to be Wednesday, March 25th at Hares Hill Elementary School, and we hope to have everyone out there. So, Ryan, if you want to get us started with kind of the overview of what we talked about, we were getting into chapter 4 of the book, and it kind of led us down some interesting paths.
Yeah, happily, and I'm so glad that it's warm now. Our last meeting was pretty brutally cold out.
Yes, 70 today.
Yeah. So in chapter 4, Haidt walked us through a little bit of the neurodevelopment of children and talked about plasticity and myelination. So this is the idea that, as we know, most people are familiar with this now, that children have the ability to do magnificent things. They learn languages very well, very quickly. They learn instruments very quickly, and that's because their brains are plastic and they're still growing and they're moldable. This gives them a huge advantage for learning new skills, but unfortunately, if you present them with something that can be harmful, it could really develop some difficult patterns that will later be hard to break. And so that's kind of what he's touching on here, and how and why we need to be careful when we're presenting them with repeated activities, such as giving them a phone. He coupled this with a part of development that he talked about, our rites of passage. And we'll get back to this as one of the questions. But in rites of passage, what happens typically is that there is a separation from the group. The individual goes out into the wilderness, maybe, and then they have to do some sort of task. Once that task is completed, they come back in as a new version of themselves or a new version of the society. And so he presented us with this, what was the old model of how people develop. They had this plasticity, allowed them to learn. They went out, they came back, and this gave them these new responsibilities. His contention here, as the through line throughout the book, is that technology has upended this order. And now what we're looking at is a group of people who are presented with a whole world without going through these initiation rites, and now they're, from a very young age, have these well-worn lines that may not be helpful for them. He talked about this through this model. He calls it the hook model. And how does this happen? How do phones become so addictive? Maybe it's intuitive for you. Maybe it's like, well, I don't need it explained. That's often the case with social science. You're like, oh, of course, that's how it works. But what happens here is there is a part of this that I found really interesting, is when you have a phone nearby, you hear it vibrate. Of course, the immediate instinct that we all have is, I'm going to check that. And in the book, they average this out, and it's about 200 alerts per day is what the average person will get. So you check it, you get a vibration, and you want to see what it is. Then the next piece is really, this is the secret sauce. It's called a variable reward. So many of us are familiar with Pavlovian classical conditioning, where every time the bell rings, there's a treat or something that you get conditioned to. This is even more powerful. This is a variable reward. So there's a bell ring, and sometimes we're going to reward you, but sometimes we don't. Mm-hmm. And that makes you want to come back. So sometimes you're going to see a little message there on an Instagram that you're going to like, ooh, that felt nice. Or maybe it's not even positive. It's just some sort of a reaction. But the next time, maybe there's nothing. And that makes you want to invest in the experience. Maybe you'll change your profile. Maybe you'll spend some time altering your user feed or something like that. And this creates a loop where now there's a trigger, there's an action, there's a reward this time, you're going to invest further, and you get further and further in. And that is the model that really, Haidt says, draws you into this dependency almost.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and the graphic that you had on the sheet that we discussed was interesting too, because I think we all experience that a little bit, maybe a lot of it, right?
Yeah.
Especially when, if you post something and that, like, you'll look at what you posted before and make sure it looked, and it's this vicious cycle. The 200 notifications was something that was shocking to me, but it's true. It's true. I'll share my son. We were talking to him, and I was looking at all the notifications he had, and it was in the hundreds for sure.
Yeah.
And think the way I look at that is, if it's 200 notifications a day, that's 200 interruptions in a day that can derail you. And I think maybe that's a strategy if you're looking for something, that's something small, a small step to put something in motion for your own kids, is to turn those notifications off. Especially during homework time and during these times where you don't want interruptions. So
that's a good point. If you're looking for I'm already in the technology thing, going all the way back to zero, it seems like too much. This could be a small step for sure. The book quote, the quote from the book that I thought was really powerful is that the smartphone is the modern day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine 24/7.
Yeah,
that's a powerful claim.
It is.
And I think you see that in the notifications. You see that even in short form video. That one of the things, if you're looking for another easy fix, is to steer your child away from the shorts, because it really limits their capacity to maintain focus for a long period of time, is what investigation shows.
And I can tell you, sitting in my seat, those shorts sometimes, as kids are flicking through, there's some things that we don't want them to see.
Hard to regulate, for sure.
Yes, for sure. I've heard the word shorts often in this office that give bad ideas and go from there. But again, we had some good discussion. We're going to touch on 3 of the discussion questions in our conversation to kind of get everybody up to speed. And a lot of the discussion was centered around initiation rites. And one of the questions was, what made you feel like you were maturing when you were a kid? So those of you listening at home, maybe if you think about that, I know we were having a little bit of conversation. Brian, what were some things that made you feel like you were maturing when you were a kid?
Yeah, the question really, before I answer it, again, gets to this idea that we went through a process, and with each step, more responsibility was given to you. And so for me, I remember it was being able to ride my bike further away from my house. Yep. I was fortunate enough to grow up in a relatively small community where I had very few dangerous roads. It was a small town. It was enclosed. So I could ride a mile away from my house when I probably 5th grade, 6th grade. And I remember having this sense of freedom. It's like, wow, I could go anywhere. So that was huge.
Interesting. You and I have pretty similar. First of all, I think of the word freedom, right? What made me feel like I was maturing was when I had freedom to go places and do things that I wanted to. And the biggest thing for me was actually around the same age, 6th grade. I went to school in Downingtown, and we could leave school and we could walk to Kerr Park and play football. So those half days, we were allowed to leave school and we wouldn't go home, or we dismissed, and we would walk. And we go down to Kerr Park and play football. We go to the McDonald's in town and so forth. And I remember being like, wow, this was it. So that freedom piece is really, I think, a common thread throughout. And I think if we bring it to technology, some of our students have digital freedom from the moment they get that device handed to them, and sometimes before they're ready. So I think that's just something to enter into the fold, and it's almost, and I think we mentioned it, and if not, we're going to, but that stealer of experience, right? The taking away that.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference there, is that this was a process you were pushed through at the right time, and when you were ready, and then you had this freedom, and it was conditional, right? It was, this works. If it doesn't work, we can draw back, we can come back. But technological freedom seems to be very difficult to manage and very difficult to take back once it's given, which is a different experience. The next question that goes right with this is, if there's, before in our discussion, there was at the book club, there seemed to have been, and you had this fascinating story about the number of school dances there used to be.
I forgot about that.
Right.
I forgot
Tell
about
us,
that.
I think that's worth repeating.
Yes. So I'm old, everybody. I've been around for a long time. So that's it. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. So when I first started teaching in 1997, 1998, it was at the middle school, and we would have school dances once a month. Every month we would have a school dance. Last Friday of the month or whatever, and that went on 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003. And then as we got closer to 2010, we started noticing like attendance dropping, right? And to the point where we're like, okay, we're not going to do them anymore every month because nobody's coming, or not as many people are coming. So we did them once a quarter. So we did them once a quarter until about 2008, 2009, 2010. And then it was twice a year. And then by 2012, which is like, that's like the line that he draws in the book, right? When social media hits, we had really poor attendance at our dances to the point that we did maybe one a year that was attendant okay. And it's because students were connecting, or they felt connected, but it was outside of the school. It was through technology. I think there is a argument to be made that is a great example of an experience stealer. I'm using the wrong term. What term is
blocker?
Blocker. Experience blocker, right? So I mean, think about all the stuff that those kids learned when they went to a dance every month. Interacting with each other and so forth. And when folks stayed home and they're on their phone, all those experiences were blocked and taken from them.
Those were real rites of passage in many ways.
They were.
For me, I remember I remember being in 7th grade and finally being like, wow, I'm going to go to my first dance now. And that felt special. For us, they were after every Friday football game. There was a dance.
Okay.
And I don't think that happens now. But even the Friday night football experience, I teach nearby, and not many people attend those anymore, at least where, it was expected. Everyone would go, and there was a hierarchy of what the different grades and kids would do. And that kind of gets into that initiation of, if you're in 7th grade, you're going to stand here. Right. If you're in 8th grade, you do this. And I wonder if those same experiences are being had now. And I think what the book is saying, many of these initiation experiences have been lost to the digital world.
Yeah, I think the pendulum has swung a little bit, because when I left the middle school, the dances, when we had them,
that's good.
They were very popular.
There's hope.
Very well attended. Friday football games definitely getting there as well, for sure. So I think that's good, and I think that comes with that balance thing that we continually go back to, and how folks have learned things. But I forgot about that story that we were talking about. But so I guess, are there a lack of initiation rights in our society? What we were talking, there are some obvious ones, right? Getting your driver's license, going to middle school, going to high school,
built in
for sure. What would your take?
I think it feels to me, from a very anecdotal position, that there were, I just watched, I had my children watch Jumanji for the first time this past weekend, and it felt like there were some real differences. Of course, I didn't grow up in the
old
60s,
Jumanji, or
the old Jumanji.
The old one.
I didn't grow up in the 60s, but you could tell that there were these sort of, the father says, and now, son, you're going to go to the Cliffside School for Boys. And there was like these built-in different initiation experiences, and there was more of a community. And I think I would like to establish more of those. And the author talks about, he has this program he kind of lays out. He goes by even numbers. At 6, do this. At 8, and they're sort of like, at 8, he says.
Yeah, now those of you listening, now think to yourself if you agree with this.
Yeah, this
I
is
thought
fascinating.
that's kind of what we had a good conversation about.
At 8, he said you should have local freedom, ability to be and move unsupervised in safe spaces. Depending on where you live, that may or may not work for you. At the age of 10 is the age of roaming, he said. Wider locus of freedom. Maybe you give your child a basic phone, no internet access. personally, I would go even further. No phone yet for me. The age of apprenticeship is at 12. Find a local mentor, get them involved. And I think that's the piece I really like. Maybe I would include for my own kids. High school is at 14, at the beginning of high school, building social networks and having more responsibility. He doesn't really go into too much detail on what that means. Maybe potentially first job around there. 16 is the initial internet adulthood. This is a greater access to the digital world. He says access here to social media. I'm not sure how realistic that is to wait till 16 these days. 18, and then everything, all bets are off, legal adulthood. They're kind of now more swimming on their own.
Right. It's an interesting list. It's an interesting, because I think it's a list assuming that you have complete control of what everyone around your child does.
Wow. Yeah.
That's
fascinating.
If you were gonna sticking to this, and by the way, we're gonna put it out there. If we're not, everyone has their own thing going on at home. If your child has had a phone since they were in 4th grade, we're not by any means.
We're all in the struggle.
We're all working this out together. But this and the book club is all about information. This was interesting because I think it leads to the final discussion question, right? Of what do you say when your child tells you all of my friends have this, right? Because if you were going to go by this timeline, you are inevitably going to present it with that question. So that was something interesting that we were talking about before we got started. So I'll ask you, all right? And I think you've already heard this question
many times.
And so did I. I think I caved a little bit.
It's so hard.
It is, because it's tough, especially with the social stuff, right? When you feel like your kids are missing social experiences or whatever, what do you say?
I think you have to divide this into two different. I think you do it, and you did it instinctively, intuitively. You're dividing this into two different buckets. There's the first bucket of missing out on a technological tool, a toy versus a social experience. So here's how I think Haidt would answer it. How I would answer it is my first step with my own kids is acknowledge that they are on a different path. That in fact, for a while, is going to be harder. I think there is cut them some slack here. It's like, this is a little hard, and you're going to be kind of going your own way for a little while. And I try to sweeten that pill by saying, but nothing of great worth comes easy. So whether they take that line or not, at least acknowledge that they're going a hard way.
And we were also saying to reframe it as well. Like, okay,
yes, and that's
not, did I steal?
No, that's fine.
It's not, hey, okay, yes, this is what you're not getting, but you know what? You're also getting, what you're getting is this.
Exactly.
Time to spend on different skills other than staring at that screen.
So Haidt talks about phones being experience blockers, and he actually put out, if you're looking for another easy entry to give to your kid about phones, he came out with a graphic novel-like-esque experience that very much mirrors his book, but for children. And he'll have many of these quick snippets of comics where he'll show one child or a preteen saying, like, practicing their guitar, and the other child starting to practice the guitar, but then they pick up a phone, and then they get into the YouTube spiral, and then it's 4 hours gone by and they've never played the guitar, where the other kid spent 4 hours practicing the guitar. Fast forward a year, all of a sudden that child A, let's call her, is at a talent show playing the guitar, and child B is in the audience like, wow, how did Janine, child A, get so good at the guitar? And it's because she has had these experiences where the child B has had these experiences blocked by having her phone. And I think trying to explain that and saying, like, listen, we're having family time, we're outside, you're learning to play the viola, you're doing whatever it is, and that's building something for you. And that is a hard message.
Maybe you bring into that the 10,000 hours.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
To truly be master something that's spent out. You can't get to 10,000 hours if you're watching YouTube shorts. And really highlighting what they're getting by spending time on other stuff
Yeah.
rather than what they're losing. The one thing that is tough, and it's why I caved, is that social piece, right? The thing that got me was the Snapchat, the streaks or whatever. I forget
where
what it
they
was.
feel like they're not in the community.
Yeah, for sure. And for that, I think you have your kids involved, you have your kids, you get social connections in other ways. And I think that's definitely a way to kind of overcome that a little bit.
I think the answer intuitively for me also, and from maybe a psychology perspective, is you foster your child's identity in as many ways as you can so that they feel enriched in these other ways. But that is a high level answer that day to day can be very difficult. Before we end, I want to touch on this one thing that I think is worth noting that I can't take credit for. It's my wife said it, and you're echoing it here, is that with this previous program, this list, and even with this question of what about, all my friends have X, is that we do feel like, for maybe the first time, that you have less control on how your child experiences reality than maybe in previous generations, where a lot of these decisions are being taken from you. Well, Johnny has X, Peter has X.
Yeah.
I want this too. And I'd be curious to talk with parents that were parenting in the 60s or 70s or 80s, and what was that like? And did they feel like they were also being, having their autonomy or having their authority undermined by society in the way that we are no longer? You can't parent your nuclear family in your house anymore. It is very much influenced by what's happening outside of your house. And I wonder if that is throughout humanity, or
because it goes back in the 60s and 70s. TV.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
that's a good point.
The Joneses have a TV. Why can't we get one?
I would argue that having the phone in your hand is more
intrusive in a whole new way.
Personal. It follows you all the time. And yes, for sure. That is a very wise statement that we'll end on, for sure. That's something to think about. You're right. That is very interesting to think on. Maybe we continue talking about that in our next session. But again, our next session is going to be on March 25th. Thank you, Ryan, for popping in and doing this. And we're looking forward to having more conversation with everybody. Remember, if you can't make the 6:30 meeting, so that's often very tough on a Wednesday or Tuesday night, please follow along with our updates. And we hope to see everybody at our next session. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.